Hello and welcome everybody to another exciting episode of In the Field here on the Reserve Pool Network. Today we are facing off with two very unique and widely touted players. We've got Dylan on our right-hand side versus Paul on our left, Paul being the absolute champion of the Midwest Dice Masters Open. Each of them are running a very unique team. We have Survival of the Fittest coming out on Paul's side, a little bit of life gain, and a focus on the new basic actions out of War of Light. Whereas we have the Doppelgangers coming out on Dylan's side. Lots of similar characters, a little bit of mirror, and some ability to copy actions and abilities with some polymorph focus using atoms. So it'll be really interesting to see how these... Oh, I completely forgot to introduce you, Isaac. My apologies.
Start over.
Let's do that. Hey and hello there everybody, and welcome to another episode of In the Field here on the Reserve Pool Network. Today I'm joined by my illustrious co-host Isaac. How are we doing today?
I'm good, sir. How are you?
I'm doing quite well. Today we've got two absolutely fantastic competitors here on our little show. On our left-hand side we have Paul, the champion of the Midwest Dice Masters Open, very accomplished player in his own right. And of course on our right-hand side we are joined by Dylan from our very own Dylan from the Reserve Pool. So we've got a very interesting matchup going on. Our teams are going to be Survival of the Fittest coming out of Paul's side, a little bit of life gain, a little bit of vicious struggle, and a little bit of burn. So that's going to be what's on his team, whereas Dylan is working with the Doppelgangers, using a variety of characters that kind of mirror themselves and manipulate levels for a variety of really interesting effects.
Yeah, it looks like some really fun effects going on. I love that Dylan has not only the doppelganger idea with Mystique, but he has a doppelgangered pair of Adam and the Atom on his team.
Not to mention that Giant Man Ant-Man setup. All those similar characters. Mystique is going to be grabbing out his opponent's dice and turning them against him. That could be coming down on really any of the big bashy characters that are on Paul's side. Specifically Red Dragon and Blue Eyes White Dragon are always key targets, but Phoenix and Parallax are actual options as well. Meanwhile, there's Worth, who is going to allow him to redirect Mystique as he chooses, and of course Kobolds along with Lantern Ring are so very powerful.
Yeah, and Paul's got some life gain cards, which will be interesting to see how he puts that Beast and Constantine, both cheap fielded, cheap buy characters, but can give them opportunities to gain some life.
The really key thing to note there is that they're both 2 costs, and with big entrance, each of them can be bought for a single sidekick die. And alongside Vicious Struggles, that life gain is going to be so important since he can basically have his opponent kill himself just by playing down that Vicious Struggle, letting that Lantern Ring deal its damage, and healing himself up. So while both of them are going to be taking the damage, he actually has a way to turn a little bit of that back on itself.
Absolutely. And it looks like Paul's won our roll-off, and he has taken his first turn here.
He does get that lucky Sidekick Bolt combo, meaning Blue Eyes Ramp is totally a thing. And alongside Big Entrance, that could be a very handy little pickup. Sadly, he won't be able to pull off both, since that would still only reduce Big Entrance to a 2 cost, and it would take a full 3 dice to do so, meaning that he would only have 1 left over, but he could take advantage of Resurrection Global if it was on the table. Sadly, it is not, so he's going to decide to go instead with the Red Dragon Global, dealing that damage and ignoring the prep, but getting some damage on the field.
Yeah, and that gets him that one early shot at Dylan. If this becomes a back and forth struggle of life, he's already got him by that one little life point ahead. Can start to make a difference when it comes down to the end of this.
And since we do have Professor X on the field, that means that this is effectively perfect ramp nonetheless, since he's still getting both of those dice out of his use pile, and he's sequestered that sidekick on the field, so it's no longer in with the clutter. It is usually better to bring Big Entrance alongside something like Resurrection or Silver Surfer, so you can guarantee you draw into it on turn 2, but it looks like Paul is more than content to kind of sit back and rely on his luck, and even if he doesn't grab it, at least PXG his way into a ton of dice on turn 3 and be able to make a bunch of little weenie purchases that are going to keep him alive throughout the course of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. That big entrance turn 2 is nice, but boy, playing around on Vassal and getting some experience, that turn 3 with that great PXG ramp and big entrance can make for some real big, really good purchases right off the bat.
Speaking of real big, really good purchases right off the bat, we see those 3 kobolds coming in off that perfect fist roll. Absolutely fantastic to grab a bunch of early fists when you're planning on building kobolds, and keeping that 1 mask in reserve means that he's going to get the exact same amount of dice to roll next turn as his opponent, Paul. So really, really lucky roll on Dylan's behalf, and he plays it perfectly. Grab the kobolds, get them in your bag, get that ramp going, and if he can pick up a lantern ring, that's going to turn into a lot of damage very fast.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he could not have had a better first turn there. Wow, that has a lot of sidekicks.
I mean, if you want to get your sidekicks out now, it's a possibility, but with that big entrance available for rolling and re-rolling, he really should be trying to pick up as much energy as possible, make those early Constantine and Beast purchases, and he does manage to pull it off quite nicely, in fact.
Yeah, there's some really good cheap characters there. He's got the 2 fists. If he decides to go after a couple beasts, and he could even go after a couple Constantines as well there.
I'm calling it as a single Constantine into double Beast with a Professor X, allowing him to get exactly 4 dice out next turn from his bag, emptying it, meaning that it's perfectly set up for whatever he wants to pull off. He can have a little bit of extra time to manipulate his use pile, and he still doesn't abandon PXG. He only gets 1 proc off of it, whereas he has 2 dice to use, but it would still be better than what he's got currently.
Yeah, looks like he's trying to determine where he's going to use that. Now, big entrance is a fun die, and I'm sure a lot of people have had opportunities to use it. But one of the things I've seen with it is you got to make that early purchase worthwhile, because as the game starts to go, big entrance can get a little bit more in the way than can be helpful.
I don't necessarily know if I agree with that, because so long as you make a single purchase with big entrance, it effectively pays for itself, because as it is used, it turns all of your dice that you're purchasing into 1 purchasing cost less. So it's effectively 1 generic energy spent towards every single purchase you make that turn. And as a purchase die, if it can even allow you to make 2 purchases, then it's already paid for itself. Whereas that extra utility it gets from putting the dice directly into your bag makes a real difference. And wow, that's a little bit of a surprise. Instead of going for the full 4 dice in the bag, he's actually picking up Vicious Struggles instead.
Yeah, I picked those up big, and a lot of it too becomes what type of team you're playing with a big entrance. If you're going after a lot of purchases, it's probably a good die for you later on. The way I've played it and the way I've used it has been the plan to buy early, not make a lot of purchases, and get that big splash early to make sure that big entrance gets its use, gets effectiveness right in the game.
Mm-hmm.
So we have the Vicious Struggle that he bought, and just 1 beast. Is that correct?
That is correct. You can see it taken right off the top there.
Yep. So
players are being consistent, making sure to purchase from the top, and we appreciate that. The one thing I did want to mention about big entrance is that while it is such an effective die for rush strategies and getting out a lot of cheap little weenie characters, the one issue it runs into is that it requires a lot of support on your team in order to make it run well. If you want to be making a lot of purchases with big entrance and getting the most use for it, you want to be bringing PXG along, which is already limiting your character options. It's already providing a global to your opponent. As we all know, I am staunchly anti-PXG, but I think that big entrance makes a reasonable enough case for it that it's still good to bring along with the team. And the other thing that big entrance does is it requires you to bring along some sort of prep and some way to mitigate its cost if you want to get it out early. Going in for a red dragon into PXG with that big entrance, and perhaps something along the lines of Resurrection or the Silver Surfer Global is so hard to pull off because it requires that perfect roll, and it's taking so many of your slots just to allow you to purchase characters earlier and faster, which can really set you behind if you roll poorly, since you no longer have the extra slots available for a more versatile team.
Yeah, it has been interesting, and I think one of the ways that for those that are listening, those that are watching this, one of the ways you have opportunities to learn how to do that is finding your way over here to Vassal. playing with these big entrance cards, playing with Vicious Struggle, and learning how they interact. And you may have one awesome game, playing with a friend here or there, but one of the things I've learned and one of the things I've been able to do is kind of see what gels well. Right before we sat down to record this, I threw a team together, played with a guy, and said, "Oh, I don't think I'll be playing that combo in the future." So definitely, it's kind of a plug for what we do here. Right now, there are looks like about 10 people on Vassal right now playing games, so it's definitely a happening night here.
That sort of sounds like a plug, but at the same time, I can totally see exactly where you're coming from with that. Vassal has been such a wonderful little platform for us all to get together and try things out on, and it's really allowed both yourself, myself, and multiple other players I've spoken to directly really get a feel for their teams and kind of narrow things down for setups that they've wanted to try out in person, but were afraid of actually bringing to their local event. Because like the one issue with local events is that they happen sporadically, so you've got a big investment in winning. You want to try your hardest to make sure that you are going to win that one night a week that you're going out to play Dice Masters. And with Vassal, since you can play it more often and more casually, you're willing to take bigger risks and try out new things that can translate into bringing newer, fresher teams and new ideas into your local scene.
Yeah, absolutely. I would imagine that Dylan would not necessarily drag Doppelganger into a store for a constructed night, but this gives him a chance to play around with it and say, "Wow, maybe this is the start of a team that I could mess around with."
And that's also another interesting thing is that not only does it allow you to bring a very gimmicky and unique setup, but it also allows you to face them. Like, how many games do you buy your opponent's basic actions on turn 2? I can probably count them on one hand, whereas here we've already seen Vicious Struggle been picked up by both players. It's out of dice on turn 3. That's just ridiculous for a basic action. It could be that the War of Light basic actions really are just that fundamentally strong and worth picking up, but I also think it speaks to the sorts of strategies and ideas that people can get up to on Vassal.
Absolutely, yeah, and I'm interested to see how Dylan puts that Vicious Struggle to use. I think it's definitely made for the team that Paul's running here, but we'll see how Dylan uses that from a defensive standpoint on his end here.
I am interested to see where we go from here, since with all those Vicious Struggles picked up and a ton of Red Dragon pings going down on both sides, we've got our damage set up, and now is going to be the first turn that the Kobolds actually make it through the bag for hopefully what will be some really big purchases, maybe some Atoms, maybe the Atom, Ant-Man, Giant Man. I'm not so certain if Giant Man would be a good idea since he requires that mask which takes away from PXG, but as just a perfect beat stick, he really can't be beat. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they choose to go about this.
Yeah, absolutely. He is ramping up, so if he decides to go after the Mystique early, I don't know if he's going to go after it at this point. And the Lantern Ring, as good as it is, with 2 Vicious Struggles on the other side of the fence, I don't know that I would use that as my moving forward strategy here.
Well, I did talk a lot about that Red Dragon, but we also see Beast being thrown in there for that little bit of extra damage. It's kind of strange to see a player brought down to a quarter life on turn 3, especially by a non-aggro team. But with the Red Dragon and the cheapo characters, it looks like Paul is more than willing to send his characters into the fray to get that damage done.
Yeah, absolutely. He pulled that Beast in, and like you said, we're 4 turns in, and he's got him down to 15 here. But Dylan's rolling quite a bit of dice. We'll see what he decides to field and keep here. Looks like he's planning on keeping that Vicious Struggle, and he's got a couple small little characters coming to the field for him.
He decides to keep a hold of that sidekick bolt in order for the Blue Eyes combo, and rerolled all those lovely little shields into Wilds and Fists in order for him to really make his big purchases. Since shields don't even appear on his team, he wants to be making Atom purchases. He wants to pick up his Lantern Ring. He wants to grab Giant Man. He wants to grab Ant-Man. None of these characters work with those shields, and so rerolling them into usable dice was a really key point, and it also gives him dice for PXG should he make that decision.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's probably trying to figure out here, does he go after Atom? Does he go after the Atom with that PXG ramp? he could pick up 2 of the atoms here. Could go after Adam and Ant-Man. I think probably what you were talking about here, the Giant Man just doesn't seem like a great option for him. He needs to hold on to those question marks and be able to use those to continue that ramp he's got going.
If he ever gets a turn where he's got a surplus, it's going to be more than acceptable for him to turn that into Giant Man. And I suspect that he wants to pick up Lantern Ring here, but he may not get the option since that's going to require his 1 bolt, which is basically how he looks to be making some of his big purchases. And so he picks up a pair of Ant-Mans and holds on to everything else in reserve. Holding on to that bolt for a little bit of Blue Eye shenanigans, and maybe even forcing a character to attack, pulling it off the field, and making sure it can't really hang around as a threat, since we do have the Phoenix Global available to both players. With Vicious Struggle in effect, any damage he can do to his opponent through that call-out ability that Phoenix provides is going to be very direct damage. And even if Paul manages to play down his own Vicious Struggle damage is not mirrored back and forth, so it would still be straight damage he could get through to his opponent, even though it is going to eventually be healed by his opponent's characters.
Yeah, absolutely. It gives him that little bit extra insurance here, and I don't foresee Paul fielding anything. Well, he's got a couple sidekicks he may field here, but I'm guessing he's going to re-roll those and try and get that energy since he's saving his big entrance.
I'll admit that it was an interesting idea for him to pick up 2 Ant-Men and hold on to that bolt to pull out whatever beast was going to come in, but I think he may have actually had a better turn if he decided to pay out that sidekick and the bolt in order to bring Adam into his used pile, since Adam is kind of the focus of the main damage potential of this team, using Adam to level himself up multiple times, and then using the Polymorph Global to spin up either Giant Men, or even Mystique in order to take advantage of her level 3 burst face.
Yeah, absolutely. If he goes to that Mystique, it's going to be a great card, and like you said, the Atom becomes something he really does need out there right now.
Mm-hmm.
If he decides to go that route. So it looks like Paul went with fielding the sidekicks he had, bought himself another Beast and another his first Constantine, and he is also with the Vicious Struggle in the field.
They do both have those Vicious Struggles down, but only one of them will ever proc at a time, since they are never going to be warring because of the actual wording of Vicious Struggle's effect. However, I think it is worthwhile that he's picking up those Constantines, since Beast is a little bit more energy intensive to make work and can really throw a wrench in your plans if you're forcing him into battle.
Yeah, absolutely. So it appears that okay, so Dylan went with the Phoenix Global here. Now, when we look at the globals that we do have on the board, Paul brought the Phoenix Global. We also have the Parallax Global, the one generic. Now, we have yet to see anybody use that. Do you think that's something that, as a game state gets moving here, that somebody may grab that to get that ideal role for him?
I believe that Paul brought that along specifically for his own game. If ever he ran into too many of the same energy and couldn't really make use of it, since once he's made all of his Beast and Constantine purchases, those fists and shields are going to be effectively useless, and he might want those for a little bit more global utility.
So we see Dylan dragging the dice out. He does have the swarm effect in place here, and he is rolling a handful of dice here.
3 swarm procs and 2 PXGs means he's got 11 dice. Some of them are covered up because of how he stacked them. But if he can just pull those out slightly, we can see the full extent of his roll. There we go. We've got 11 dice down, multiple fists, perfect rolls on those kobolds, since he managed to pull them off on their double fist faces. That's the absolute ideal for kobolds, and this would be a staggering turn if he managed to have that Lantern Ring active, but sadly that is not something he's chosen to pick up by this time, so it's definitely something he's going to want to grab in the turns coming forward.
Sure, but again, with Paul having that vicious struggle out there, as much as it would have hit him, it would definitely be bringing Dylan closer to his demise as well. So I think he's probably trying to figure out a way to get around those vicious struggles at this point.
When it comes to purchases, he's got a few options. Like I said, he's got that lantern ring, but considering the just disgusting amount of energy available to him, he may actually want to pick up that Mystique as well, or maybe picking up the Atom in order to set up the polymorph combo for when Mystique eventually comes onto the field. Mystique would just be such a powerful character here with those 5 characters on Paul's field that are all 6 cost and higher. Specifically, Blue Eyes White Dragon is really nasty because of its super high level 1 stats, super high level 3 stats. Red Dragon, of course, gives him access to that breath weapon, which can clear away entire fields. And maybe having that ability to pick up a Bolt character in order to swing with, as well as the Mass character, would put a little bit of extra damage into Lantern Ring.
Absolutely. So he is spending fistfuls of energy here, double fistfuls, and there's that Mystique.
And picking up that Mystique is going to give him some options as what to do later. We saw that Parallax was an option, but he decided against it and instead picked up Mystique and Worth. So he is planning on using that Worth combo with Mystique in order to retarget her as he chooses.
Yeah, absolutely. The Worth is a fun little card. The when fielded effects, and I believe with what Dylan's got, the only when fielded he's got is Mystique. So those two are very tied in together as a combo he hopes to use.
Fun little pair of blue buddies, so to speak.
Absolutely.
He does manage to maintain those 3 masks for plenty of PXGs, and with the Kobold swarming that's going to be going on, we've got almost a guaranteed large draw coming in for him next turn. Whereas we still see Vicious Struggle being thrown down. I'm a little bit disappointed we didn't see Lantern Ring picked up, since that looks like it's going to be the main damage potential aside from Red Dragon swinging in. And with Red Dragon swinging in, Mira's Global becomes really effective, since everyone else swinging alongside the Red Dragon is able to be mitigated if they're high enough, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think it'll be interesting to see what Dylan's thought process was about this point in the game. To say, did he pass on that Lantern Ring knowing that Paul's been able to pretty consistently keep a Vicious Struggle out there on the field, and that ring, as much as it would be a great source of damage to Paul, Dylan's losing the war on life right now, and if he decides to do that, he'll end up at the lower end of the life spectrum here.
I think what's going through his head right now is he doesn't want to play down the Lantern Ring and then get dragged out to attack with the Phoenix Global for a ton of Vicious Struggle damage, because it is entirely possible that he might not get the perfect rolls on the turns that he needs them in order to get that full lethal strictly from swinging in with his fist characters. However, if he ever manages it, it doesn't matter if Vicious Struggle is on the board. If he can do lethal all in a single instance, none of that damage is redirected. The game will end the moment that Paul's life hits 0. So that's something that Dylan needs to keep in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. As he continues to tank away at him, and that's where the math skills of this game come into play. You have to be able to look and say, 2, 3, 4 turns down the line, can I do this damage? Is it going to be enough to take care of him? And the last thing he'd want to do is leave him hanging out at like 1 life or anything where it's just all going to come flooding back his way.
Oh, I agree. 18 is a lot of damage to try and deal all in 1 turn, but Lantern Ring actually makes that a possibility, especially with those kobolds available to draw even more dice for more energy and more fists. If he can get down a second Ant-Man, all he needs is a Lantern Ring and 6 fists in his reserve pool, and that's lethal right there. It doesn't matter what's coming out of his opponent's field.
Yeah, absolutely. And between the Ant-Man and the Cobalt, like you said, he has Fist Aplenty, which is also why I'm guessing he has that Anger Issue card to make use of those fists sitting in his reserve pool if the opportunity were to arise.
The other really nasty thing to point out is that Paul has no way of mitigating the Lantern Ring damage. It is character ability damage, which means that a character like Human Paladin could mitigate it somewhat with its global, but all he has for mitigation is Mira, and that's not enough. In fact, it doesn't even touch it because ability damage and combat damage are two entirely separate things.
Absolutely, yeah. He's looking at taking all of it, and like you said, does not have a way around it. Unfortunately, at this point, doesn't have a distraction, which wouldn't matter because that would be out in the field. But yeah, he's on a clock with the number of fists that Dylan has over there. So he absolutely needs to figure out how he's going to get in and get that win here.
We see Dylan sacrificing his sidekick in order to make sure that the beast does not proc and that it kind of just hangs around in the field for now. He doesn't want his opponent getting that extra bit of life. And we do see some more Kobold procs, which is always nice. A little bit of extra swarm, a bunch of extra dice. I really want to see that Lantern Ring picked up. But with the right setup, Red Dragon into a full field swing could actually kill him outright if we get enough character faces and enough extra pump for anger issues. We see a roll without Mystique, so that's not going to be happening this turn. If he can get her on the field, he still may need to use the Polymorph Global to spin her up, but the Kobold at its level 3 face is always more than happy to provide that. The sad thing is he also has to spend energy on the Red Dragon Global, the Red Dragon's Breath Weapon, unless he wants to pay his own life, which is a possibility. And while that would still deal 2 damage back to him from the Vicious Struggle before his characters hit in for combat, that would mean he only needed 16 combat damage out of his whole field. Assuming we get a level 3 Red Dragon and he keeps the character faces he currently has, that would be perfect lethal. So it will be interesting to see what happens, and there's the level 3 Mystique.
Yeah, it's a great roll. It's exactly what he's looking for. 2 field costs to get her out there, and she becomes a big old beast for him here.
We're going to have to see him play his cards right, especially since Mira actually takes that Red Dragon combat damage down from 8 down to 2. But if he can pump his other characters properly, I believe he may be able to pull out lethal since there's only going to be 1 Mira. Let's count it up, shall we? We've got 1 from the Kobold, 1 from the other Kobold, yep. 2 from the Ant-Man, 3 from the other Ant-Man, totaling 7. 2 from the Mira Global Red Dragon. Another 2 from that, meaning we've got 11 damage. 12 damage from the Sidekick. We have spent 2 energy. We only have 2 pump damage, so that could only be a max of 14 damage this turn, which would not kill Paul and would instead be lethal in the other direction. So we're going to have to see how that works out. He may not even want to copy the Red Dragon at all, since his opponent has that Wild in reserve, which could turn into a Phoenix, dragging him in for 8 damage to both parties.
Yeah, it's not the way he wants to go, and obviously right now Dylan is doing just what you said. He's rolling through that math. He's trying to figure out when you have this many dice in front of you and you know you're up against that Vicious Struggle, it's important what he fields, when he fields it, and knowing what may or may not be coming right back at his face here.
I did mention that he doesn't quite have lethal here, but with a little bit of a reroll using the masks on the Parallax Global, that could be turned around. If he doesn't want to try for the Parallax Global this turn, he can instead take the safe option of Lantern Ring using that 1 Wild he has in reserve alongside any number of his kind of waste energy. He is calling out a dragon as his copy for Mystique, but we are going to have him pick a specific dragon.
And Red Dragon it is.
There we go. He is going to have access to that breath weapon capability. Parallax looks dragon-esque, and we've got that Blue Eyes White dragon sitting there looking tempting, and that's usually going to be the perfect Mystique target, but with that red dragon, he gains access to that breath weapon, which is so vital in this last little setup turn.
Absolutely. And he's loading up the characters.
Dylan is going through those lethal calculations right now, trying to determine how he wants to go about this last little turn here, since he believes he's got the ability to edge it out, and I think that he may have misread the maths here for getting the Mirror Global, but he's swinging in with that red dragon and all of his field in tow, so we're going to have to see what happens here.
So he decided to take the 2 life damage to drop himself down.
We see that breath weapon coming out, clearing the way for all of his attackers and dealing 2 damage to both players because Vicious Struggle is in effect. We have a very good selection of pump globals coming from those fists, and I think that the plan is going to be to polymorph his Ant-Man's up levels in order to get that little bit of extra damage he needs. It looks like he's making sure he's got those masks going to the right places, spinning his kobolds down, spinning his Ant-Men up, keeping the Red Dragon Mystique combo at level 3, making sure that it's still the best target in order for his opponent to use that Mirror Global on. But I think that's actually going to be game if he pulls it off correctly. Let's see what they decide to do in this last little turn here.
Leveling up those Ant-Man that now are hitting him with that 5, and now he's given Paul the opportunity, passing him priority here. He is sitting on his shield and question mark, which we've got to imagine he's going to sit on that question mark just in case for Mira, but looking at the math here.
Paul's tossing out that Mirror Global, taking Mystique Red Dragon combos damage down to 2. But that's still not going to be enough to save him, since that's still 15 damage on the board, and with 4 possible Anger Issues pumps, that's going to be a whopping 19 damage. Paul is seeing if he can do any little bits of maths to maybe save his hide, and there it is. We have a GG out from the players, so that was a just staggering final turn. Mystique into any sort of dragon is always such a powerful play, and she really offers that maximum versatility to just play with what's on the board.
Yeah, that was exactly what he needed out of that Mystique, and you know, the Lantern Ring may have been his original plan here, and we'll see when we talk to him. But boy, the Mystique was a great pull, and that was really studying that other side of the board. He knew what his opponent had. He saw that dragon, and he knew Mystique was going to be a big punch if he got her right where he wanted her at level 3.
I also really like the risk there, because that Vicious Struggle on the board means that if you've miscalculated by even a fraction of a damage, that means that you're out of the game. You've taken yourself out. You've done the work for your opponent. Vicious Struggle turns the whole game on its head with the idea that you really need to get all of that damage all in one turn, and normally Mira is a great way to counter those one-shots, but it seems that in this particular matchup it didn't quite manage to pull it off, specifically because we had those polymorphs there on Dylan's side, which allowed those Ant-Men to get up to their maximum damage value. So let's start with you, Dylan. How did you really feel about this team, and what really was the turning point for when you took control of the game?
Well, I wanted to do something because I noticed that their recent ruling said that, you know, you can have duplicate, essentially what are the same character, you know, like you have the Ant-Man and then you have Giant Man, which are technically in canon the same person, or not same person but same character. So I wanted to make something around that. I think that the team itself kind of fell into place, though, really, with that Mystique. I think that was a big turn for me, and turning point was when I was able to actually get her. I wanted to grab my lantern multiple times, the Lantern Ring, but I knew with that Vicious Struggle and the way he was filtering through them so quickly that I felt like it was going to bite me in the butt in the end. So I just held off on that and kind of just built up my wall until I was able to make that that final strike to really just clear it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Talking to Necros, we went through that. That's, as a player, as I'm studying and kind of looking at, okay, if I'm Dylan, what am I going to do? I think you used that opportunity to say, okay, this is my win condition. It may not win. What other options do I have? And you didn't bring the Red Dragon, but you had to be able to think on the fly. When you looked at your Mystique and you put her on this team, is that the type of character you were hoping to see on the other side of the field?
Yeah, generally something like that, or anything that's really a board state control. I like a Jinzo or something like that, or even a Wasp. I know it's expensive, but the smallest things can make a big deal in this game sometimes. I didn't really bring. I mean, my team is focused more around ramping with kobolds and not too heavily reliant on any kind of like ramping mechanics global wise. But I definitely used the anger issues, and that was a thought process with the kobolds to kind of feed the anger issues, and the polymorph. I know with that Mystique and even with the Giant Man, that can be the difference in the game is having that ability to rotate up and make your characters actually viable versus chump blockers.
I know you just mentioned it with the kobolds and the anger issues and the polymorph fitting in with the Ant-Man, but I really want to call attention to how perfectly you crafted the synergy with your basic actions on this team. Even though you never decided to go out and buy them, each one of them has a really important slot on this team that can make you win in a variety of ways, and I think that was the real way you managed to edge out Paul here, was that you had multiple different ways that all allowed you to win. You had the anger issues offering some overcrush if you got stalled down. You had the Lantern Ring with the Kobold energy allowing you to really just swing in for a ton of damage on the right rolls. And you had that Mystique giving you effectively a wild card character that could fix the issues that you had with your team if you ever came up against a strategy that countered your own, like this one with the Vicious Struggles really hurting your ability to pick up that Lantern Ring. So I've got to ask, what was the real idea when you decided to bring all those characters together? Were you trying to set up a sort of backup for every sort of situation you could come into, or did they just kind of come together on their own as like just the best option for that slot?
Do we lose him? Did I lose y'all? Hello?
I think he is thinking about it.
Ah, okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. What I was saying is that the Atom were more just a kind of a placeholder in the sense that I wanted to exploit the idea of the doppelganger having two of the same character, but Mystique just kind of fell into place once I decided to go with that format. I know she was really like the best option in terms of taking advantage of what I don't have on my team. And I have to say, that Vicious Struggle, I'm sure a lot of people have played up against it, is really a lot of pressure. Like that put me on the ropes a lot of the game where I was super hesitant to do anything just because I wanted to make sure that I had everything in the right place before I made that commitment. And I didn't really have an answer to it other than making sure, in the end I had enough to do it. And that Red Dragon he brought, just really helped me out in terms of giving me a good option to at least make it through. If he had those sidekicks and that beast up, it really would have taken a lot longer, I think, in terms of being able to win and be able to make that solid knockout. So.
Yeah, I wasn't even paying. I wasn't even thinking about you polymorphing up the Ant-Man until it happened, and I felt like I kind of blew my ramp early, and that kind of threw me out of whack. I was behind on dice most of the game, it felt like.
I know exactly what you mean by that feeling. I think that's one of the reasons that I don't take to PXG necessarily as much as some of the other players, is that I feel like if you ever get the off turn where you lose that PXG ramp, where you don't roll enough masks to kind of keep yourself going, keep yourself funded, your whole game plan just goes right down the drain.
Yeah, his early purchase of that Vicious Struggle was a smart move. That made me feel forced into buying that second Vicious Struggle, my last Vicious Struggle. On a turn, I wouldn't have necessarily done it. If the opponent had left two out there, I probably saved some of that energy in that turn to cycle a little more to keep ahead on the cycle. But as soon as he took one, I didn't want him having two. So that was a smart move.
That's a really interesting concept that I'd never really considered, is pressuring your opponent with purchases rather than with damage. Forcing your opponent to kind of look at their basic actions and say, what would happen if he managed to steal the last one? Would that really mess up my strategy? And you looked at that and made the value judgment to take the last vicious struggle rather than ramping perfectly. And I think that was, as you said, just a really great move on Dylan's part, pulling off that really interesting mind game there.
Because in the end, my build is designed just to circle those sidekicks through and through and through, so I always have enough to not have what happened at the end there, which is if I have like one more, then at least I have 2 mirror plays, and that just wasn't there because of that. So that's where if you were asking me where I felt like it changed, it was that moment right there.
Yeah, and I think that's really an important part of playing on Vassal, is taking a look at your team, taking a look at the match, and figuring out not necessarily what you did wrong, but where the game went wrong and how you can go about fixing that next time. Because it's not always down to your own faults losing. Sometimes it's your opponent doing something well, like that purchase of the Vicious Struggle. And there's not really some way that you can always plan ahead for all those moments. So taking a moment to look back and seeing how your opponent did well and trying to emulate that in your next game maybe is a better idea than looking at what you did wrong.
Right. I agree. So, but I really like your team, man. It's a pretty cool concept. I liked it. So, it was fun playing against it.
Well, Paul, playing on Vassal here, how much experience have you had playing in this format? What did you think of it?
Well, as you know, the last as the people don't know, but you know, the last time we started to play was my first time playing on Vassal, and this is only my second time. My brother's been meaning to get it loaded up so we can play, because he lives in the same city. We're not close enough to where we can just meet up every other day or anything, but he hasn't done it yet. But I like it. I mean, I've already done some other building on it just to play around with things. It's a lot easier sometimes than just pulling out my books and physically getting the cards out, so then I can kind of throw something out there. If it doesn't work at all, it's not a waste of half hour putting cards back, or so that's kind of nice. But yeah, I like the format a lot, actually.
I'm glad to hear you say it. I think Vassal provides a really unique and valuable utility to anyone who wants to play Dice Masters, either with someone who doesn't have a camera or is too far away to make constant actual meetups with. And it also, as you mentioned, is a really great way to set up teams without all the hassle of the actual physical cards going around. If that's something you're into, like you like the feel of cards in your hands and pushing them around, like that's something that you always have the option of, but Vassal gives you the option to go past that and just deal with the cards in a really nice, super clean, really easy format.
Yeah, I'm actually thinking about encouraging some of our newer players that don't have a robust pool of cards right now, because they're pretty new and they're trying to spot buy. I'm thinking about encouraging them to get on here, because it gives them a chance to, okay, I like these characters, but can I really make a team work out of these characters before they go buy a bunch of cards that are useless to them? So.
And speaking of newer players, where exactly are you playing currently, and what's the situation with that?
I live in the Kansas City metro area. I actually live in a suburb of Kansas City called Independence, but like many cities, there's many suburbs. We have a pretty good amount of players at this point. We've got 3 stores that actually do OP events fairly, at least once a month, if not more. So it gets pretty hectic sometimes. Actually, we usually get anywhere from 10 to up to 30 players locally, even depending on the events. We would have probably gotten around that for the Rainbow Draft weekends, except they were capped. So, and none of our stores got multiple packs, so we were limited to 16 players for those. But we still got the max of 16, of course, and then a few extra people playing around on the fringe during those events.
It's really great to hear that you have such an active and lively, really engaged scene. And I've got to ask, has anyone ever been intimidated knowing that they're coming up against the champion of the Midwest Masters Open?
Yeah, it's funny. Since I won, some of our other players that are just as good as me. Miles is one of our local players. He's actually made some of the bigger events, and even some of our other players, they act intimidated even in the rainbow drafts, and I'm like, I'm no better than any of you all. Just I happened to win that event. In fact, there were a couple situations, like most people could probably say for any big tournament like that. There were a couple moments where I just flat out got a little lucky. In my top 4 match against Josh Temple. He's a pretty active person on some of the forums. He could have had me if he had just noticed that I had a wild energy left and a transfer power to transfer power the attack value from his Wolverine. But he did not, and thus that changed that game. So.
Yeah, those last little in the heat of the moment, those big competitions. I'm guilty of missing some of those myself, and boy, you should kick yourself afterwards for those.
Yeah, I told him not to take it too hard. It was wild energy, and it's this thing I've been telling my kids. All 3 of my kids play. They're all teenagers, 13 to 17, and they all play. So, I told them, watch out for that, because mentally we're conditioned to look at as a wild energy as a mask. You see it in your mind as a mask if you're not careful. So just something for newer players to watch, because we all know PXG and we think, oh, that's a mask, but it's not always a mask. And I think that's what happened to him there.
I don't need any more reasons to hate PXG any more than I do, but you're giving them to me anyways, and I love you for it.
Yeah.
Such PXG hate. I guess I should ask you, what is your stance on the PXG end? Do you use it?
No.
Do you have it on your teams, or is it a big component?
I almost always put it on my teams.
Crutch.
It is a crutch that I have a hard time going without. For me, it's not. To me, I guess I take the opposite stance. I feel like it gives the opportunity to play around with some different larger characters or different characters than I normally feel like I could competitively. Does that make sense? And that might not be fair. I probably am not. I'm probably overvaluing it, to be honest with you.
Well, and we've had this discussion on the forums, online, in Hangouts a lot. I fall less. I'm probably right somewhere in the middle between the two of you. I use it when I think it's necessary for the team I'm building to be successful. But to just always throw it on every team, it's not the approach I take at all. And some teams really need it and need it to be successful. And but to have it on every team, there's other ways to ramp, there's other ways to churn. And one of the fun things about trying these things out is being able to say, well, maybe I didn't necessarily need that, or maybe my opponent completely used it way better than I did, and I didn't need it that particular game.
Yeah, it's funny. Early on, I say early on, when D&D first came out, one of the first teams I built was a swarm team with Colossus and a Human Torch, and the only reason I leaned away from going with kobolds as a swarm, as a tactic for ramp, is my fear of magic missile and things that could kill, or other Human Torches, things that could kill them off easily and then just muck up my bag. But with the advent of Iron Fist, I'm starting to lean towards going ahead and getting the kobolds again and going with Iron Fist kobolds and use that as my ramp, and then I have their protection. So we'll see. That's kind of a thought that I was having.
And that's a really interesting thought to get out of you here, is that the thing that Vassal really does is brings unique team ideas and strategy to the table, and having you on and having a little chat while we play Vassal is exactly what this cast is here for. So I'm really glad we could get you out here, take a little bit of your time, see how you play, and get some of your ideas on the game itself. That's always really gratifying to hear and very enlightening.
Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to come on. I mean, I'm honored that y'all had me on here, and it was fun. Like I said, I like it, and I'll try to get on more often and maybe just play some games. And if I get a chance to do this again, I'll be more than happy to do it for you.
Dylan, I think that was a challenge for a rematch.
Yes, a roundabout way, right?
I'll gladly accept that. That was a fun game, and definitely, like I said, I felt like you had me for over half the game. I was down to like 14, and I felt like there was nowhere I could come out, and then it just kind of rolls. You know how that goes. I mean, the luck of it.
Yep.
So
The one thing
but
that can
I look forward to another tournament.
Yeah, the one thing that can beat Vicious Struggle is all that combat damage at once. It can't deal with that. So that's how you got to do it. So.
Yep.
Well, thank you all so much for watching. It's been a really delightful match, a little bit of light banter there at the end, really skillful play, and a real turnabout there in the middle of the game. So I think this was a really great match to have been able to watch play out. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and check out our other videos. We release 1 or 2 videos a week, and I'm sure that you'll find something you can really enjoy. You can also drop by thereservepool.com to fill all your Dice Masters needs. Thank you all for watching. Have a great day, everybody, and thank you for joining us here on In the Field.
Thanks a lot.